But so the woodworking school, it was, my teacher was taught by James Krenov. James Krenov was taught by Carl Malmsten, a designer out of Sweden. So I'm in that tradition. And Krenov's first book and maybe most influential book is called The Impractical Cabinet Maker. And so my teacher, riffing off of that, called the program, the 9-month program, or it's a year program. I did 9 months of it. It was called the Impractical Cabinet Maker program. And the first term was called Impractical Studies. So there was no mistaking what you were signing up for. This is not practical. And I'm coming from rural Alberta, immigrant dad, farming mom, both of them teachers. We do things that are practical. They have to be practical. And so I'm in this being like, we have a problem. I want to be here. I love this. It's expressly impractical. And so the first week you spend making your own tools. So the first day or two, you start with rough iron, not rough, like rough shaped irons, and you have to set them up, which is you hone the back and you hone the face. You lap the back, you learn how to sharpen. So the first day of woodworking school, you're working with steel, and like nobody has ever done this before. Whether you've come from a carpenter background or tech college as a cabinet maker, like this is not what people are taught in the market anymore.
Yeah.
And from there, you lap your irons, you hone them up, you get like you showed us how to do it in 2 hours. You're shaving the hair off your arms, they get it razor sharp,
Wow.
and then you make your own planes, and you make 3 planes, and those are the planes you're going to use for the rest of the term. You can make more, at your leisure thereafter, but you go through that process, and then you get into the wood. And I don't know, Paul, if you know much about woodworking or if you've ever worked with a hand plane,
A
but
little bit.
maybe you remember or have seen the quality of surface that comes from a sheared cut instead of an abraded cut. And like I was good with my hands and good with woodworking. I loved shop class in high school. We built a boat in grade 12. I knew what woodworking was, so I thought. And what I was introduced to at this school was just dazzling.
Hmm.
Like you sand a surface, it looks good, feels good. You plane that surface with a finely set iron and take shavings that like hang in the air like a feather.
Hmm.
Uh, and like the light and it's the light. Wood is so full of light, so responsive to light, but we mute that when we sand it. And do you know the concept wabi sabi, Japanese imperfect perfection? It's it was a sensibility of the school where you're not trying to make things perfect. We call them fingerprints. So if you run your hands across a curved surface, it's not a perfect radius or a perfect arc. You feel the little facets from every passage of the plane, and you leave that there. You let it be part of the story. So that was the kind of place. Yes, your sense of it is correct, where machines are a means of working, of getting you close, but all the fit and the finish, all the joinery is done by hand, and it's done slowly. And I don't think they named the school the Inside Passage intentionally to refer to what was going on inside their students. The Inside Passage is a naval, you're aware, up here. It's a geographical thing, but very much so. The students who were there were either retired or late 20s, early 30s. There was one guy who came out of high school and he didn't quite fit.
Oh,
And every
that's a nice mix because late 20s, early 30s, developmentally, like you've probably already learned some failure. And
Exactly.
so you're beginning to open up to some bigger, more difficult things. And retired people have probably known a lot of failure and can teach from it. So it sounds really like just an ideal situation.
And also, like, we had a retired guy who's a lawyer, very successful, but the success
Right.
was not satisfying, if you will.
Yeah.
It didn't have what it didn't have this other dimension that the school was soaked in and trying to manifest. So the first thing that happened at the school for me was I was really battling with this part of me that was saying, you should not be here. This is a waste of time. What are we going to do with this? How is it going to work out? And I was able to say to it at some point early on, like, do you have any better ideas? Like, we've worked oil and gas for 4 years. How did you like that? We made the money. Here, like, we're still miserable. And I was like, do you have any better ideas? And it was as if he said, no. I was like, then could you just shut up? Like, we're on the same team. And if you don't have any ideas, like, can we just let this ride for 3 or 4 months? And I was able to bargain with myself in that way, and it worked out. Where he was like, "Okay, fine, you are enjoying this," as in you're enjoying it, as I kind of am enjoying it. You know, that part of me still gets to make perfectly straight cuts and make the joints fit as well as I can. But heading into it as well, and this is where Jordan Peterson first appeared on my radar and was really helpful. I'd been trying to, like, Pageau talks about how the postmodern trick is how you take a unity and you lower it down one level and you say, oh, that's just an amalgamation of these lower things. And I'd been doing that all through, my from adolescence onward. It's what I did with photography. Oh, photography, they're just pretty pictures. But I didn't see what I was doing, and it was very effective at undermining the soul part of it. And so I went to this woodworking school and I'm going into it and I'm like, what the hell are you doing? You're paying all this money and all you're learning how to do, you're just learning how to make a box. It's just a box. That's all it is.
In China, they're making boxes like mad, and here you
Exactly.
are.
Yeah. And so the reason why, like, this is kind of going backwards a bit. We'll probably get there. Pageau has been so wonderful for me to like find out about and tune into, because it's like he's speaking my language. It's I didn't know I was a pattern reader, or I didn't know that that's how I thought in patterns. I didn't know that that was how I made sense of the world. That's just how I did it. And then to find him and he's like codified it and articulated it, it's like, oh, yes. So I'm over on the Sunshine Coast. I'm there early on after arriving. I'm like, hey, I'm here. I'm learning how to make boxes. That's what I'm learning how to do. And then the thought occurs to me, well, what is a box anyway? And I was like, all right. So a box is to space what a word is to perception. And you see a forest, and you just see a forest. But then, oh, there's a tree. So the tree separates from the forest. And then, well, that's a cedar tree. That's a redwood. That's a walnut tree. What's that doing here? That doesn't belong here at all. That's interesting. Oh, boxwood. And like, but I had an experience. Part of my business is salvaging hardwood trees. I have to know what they are. And because you can spend a lot of money on something that isn't what you thought it was.
That's a bad thing.
Yeah, which I didn't spend a lot, but I've gone down the wrong trail. And it occurred to me at one point that, oh, boxwood grows here, and it's a very useful wood. It's extremely hard. This is the hedgewood that topiary is made of. I was like, I wonder if that grows here. I wonder if it grows to size. Maybe I could start collecting boxwood at high enough grade and scale to maybe make some money with it. So I started looking for it. There it was at the four-way stop, that like this huge boxwood tree at the four-way stop that I stopped at twice a day to and from work. And it, like, completely oblivious to it. Then I start looking for it, boom, you see it. And so that principle that Pageau and Peterson and Vervaeke have all talked about, where you see what you are looking for, you
Right.
perceive what you look for.
You have
Kind of
eyes to see. Now you
yes,
have eyes to see.
yes. And everybody else in that little town didn't see it at all.
Yep.
And so you have this awareness of yourself of being some, you're enchanted by things that everybody else just is, but it's normal or part of the landscape. Anyhow, that concept is that's the example of the words causing something to come into being. And I was like, well, what is a box? And as occurred, I thought a box can be the same thing in space that a word is in perception. And so here is where I live. Here is where I sleep. Here is where I work. And then in this place where I work, here is where the books go. Here's where the pens go. In that room, in that other room, that other box, that's where I cook. And then this is where the pans go in that box where I cook. And then this is where the cutlery goes. And inside that box where the cutlery goes, here's where the spoons go. And I'm like, oh, okay, this makes sense. And then I was like, so the boxes that I'm learning how to make at this woodworking school are to language, are are to cabinet making what poetry is to language.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, I don't know what that means worked out, but I'm interested in what that could become if I follow that insight.
It's a shame. Well, I might have mentioned this in the estuary group up in Bellingham, but Karen Wong came to the Olympia event with she had been speaking to someone and oh gosh, I've got to really clip this because she said it so perfectly. It's basically once you get to the point of seeing that there's no bottom to
Mm-hmm.
something.
Mm-hmm.
And she was talking to one person, and that person, it was milk or
Oh, interesting.
paint
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
or hair. And because you just and people would say, "What, milk or
Mm-hmm.
paint or hair?" But you begin to realize that something that reality is not what we think it is. And
Yes.
it sounds like through the box, that was sort of your entry into another world that made sense of the world that you were living in before.
I flipped into a different mode. And yeah, look, what you described is exactly the case. And so my access, like the key that got me into this was the Genesis story. And God said, let there be, and it was. And it was at this, and so I'm working with that as my source code, if you will. And can I apply it to this program and will it run? And I was like, I think that runs. And then a buddy of mine posted on Facebook an interview that Peterson had done with the school newspaper. This is 2016, and things are starting, like
Mm.
the rocket engines are starting to ignite.
Yeah.
And in that, so I grew up in Alberta. I'm a conservative guy. I tend to agree with what like Peterson is talking about and arguing against. I agree with his argument against what he's arguing against, and so I think it's just going to be a short little political polemic, and then like that's this part, but then this part underneath of it, he goes into the Genesis story, and he's talking about the words creating, and I'm like, wait, I've just been here, and what he's saying maps on to what I was playing with and trying out, and I was like, what else is he saying? And so it was just like I'm advancing over here and then I'm checking it against what he's saying. And these two are, the contexts are very different, but the concepts match or map onto one another. And that's how I got roped into this. Not roped in. That's how I got onto the trail. That was the first breadcrumb.